Let's take that Hot Toys figure display to the next level by creating a slightly larger diorama base that'll really make the figure and your entire display stand out. Stay tuned for the entire process. Welcome back to another episode of Crafted by Metamorphic Customs. I'm Desi, and yup, we're getting back to dioramas in this episode, and we'll be creating a jagged earth rock diorama base that will really emphasize a figure, right? Because it's a little larger than the standard Hot Toys base you're used to getting when you buy a Hot Toy. So this will, like I said, make your display stand out, maybe create a centerpiece out of all your Hot Toys. It'll fit in a detolf or in any other kind of shelf, and it sits in a nice wooden plaque, making it really classy. So not much to say other than that. Let's get right down to the process. But before we do that, remember, go to the video description below to find the link to all the materials and tools that I've used. These are the same links that I used to buy these products. Some of them are affiliate links, some of them are not. It doesn't really cost you anything extra for the affiliate links, but it helps support the channel. So anyways, let's go to the workshop. And I'm going to start with a piece of foam core board. This is the brand Ready Board that's available at your Dollar Tree store. And the reason I'm using this is because foam core board is essentially XPS with a paper covering on either side. And what's nice about it is that if you're familiar with foam core board, it's pretty thin. You don't have to cut down thicker XPS foam that you got at the hardware store. And it's really cheap. Like I said, I got it at the dollar store, so it was $1.25 at local Dollar Tree. And what I've done here is measured out a circle that's 8 inches in diameter, or about 20 centimeters, give or take. And I'm cutting it out using my X-Acto blade. And you can see I'm just freehanding the cut based on the circle that I drew onto this square piece of foam core board. Because I freehanded the cut, it's not perfect. It just has to be close enough. It has to be a general circle in shape, but it doesn't have to be this perfect machined cut. And when I've done that, I'm now going to rip off the paper. I mentioned that foam core is essentially XPS with a paper covering on either side. The good thing about this particular brand of foam core board that's called Ready Board is that it's very easy to tear off the paper, as you see. And that's important. You need to tear off the paper, really, because you just want to end up with the thin XPS. Now that I've created the circular base, now I'm going to go and turn to actual XPS that I got at the hardware store. Now the reason I'm switching over to this one is because now I need it to be thicker. The thin piece was just, again, for the overall platform or base, so I can build on top of it. Now I'm going to be building thicker pieces of rocks, so that's why I've turned to this chunkier XPS. In here, I've gotten 2 pieces of 1-inch thick XPS and I've glued them together. And if you're wondering, couldn't I have just started off with 2-inch thick XPS? The answer is yes. It's just not readily available at that thickness in my area, which is South Florida. So I'm kind of limited to 1-inch thick XPS, which is fine. I just glue two pieces together, as you can see, and I start carving at it. If you've seen my previous episodes, when I start carving XPS foam to make rocks, which is exactly what I'm doing here, I don't necessarily follow a pattern. I just start making cuts till I feel it looks right. It looks like a natural rock formation. I try my best not to make it look like, oh, it's just cut XPS foam. No, I try to cut it to make it look like something that, whether it's natural or maybe even unnatural, maybe it seems alien, but the point is to not make it look like you cut it out of foam. That's the goal. There's no pattern I'm following. I'm not even looking at a reference picture, off screen there or anything. I'm just literally making jagged cuts into chunks of foam. I'm going to continue carving out different pieces or different chunks of 2-inch XPS pieces. Again, it's really 2 1-inch pieces glued together, but for all intents and purposes, 2-inch chunks. And these first 2 pieces that you see here, this is really the foundation. Well, not the foundation, because the white circle under it, that's really the foundation. But these are the 2 main ground coverings, these first 2 green pieces of XPS. And the reason they're the main ground covering is because these 2 pieces will remain the flat areas of this diorama base. This is the area where you'll be able to stand a figure pretty much by itself and balance it out pretty well, so it doesn't need a grabber or a post to keep it up. I think that's important, to have that kind of flat or nearly flat surface area in your diorama bases, so that a figure can stand naturally, right? Because sometimes when you have jagged rocks all over the ground, it makes it look really cool, but then you're really limited. Your figure will never be able to stand on its own. It will always need a grabber post or a dynamic stand or something like that behind them. So my goal here was for the figure to be able to stand on its own, almost to create that statue feel with a posable action figure. So these next pieces I'm carving are the large pieces that I want at the back of this diorama base. So these rock pieces will stand upright. It'll look like strange, jagged rock formations, as I keep calling them. And I've also, as you can already see, carved out smaller pieces of rock that are going to go towards the front, in front of what I call the main ground covering, the flat area. These little pieces of rock just add more visual detail and, again, add to the whole overall. This is some kind of rugged earth terrain with rocks. And these rocks I'm putting towards the back, again, these are all kind of protruding upwards. It's going to be very hard for a figure to stand all the way back here unless he's sitting down or something. It's really meant to stand towards the middle or the front of the base. But this back provides kind of a short background too. It gives the entire diorama more depth. And what I'm doing here is I've gotten little pebbles of rocks that you can find probably outside. Hopefully you have something this size. If you can't, you can always buy little rocks like this from a hobby store or even at Michael's or wherever. But the point is, get some rocks that you think are the appropriate size and glue them down. I've also glued even smaller rocks in between the 2 main ground coverings, and the only reason I've done that is so it's not too deep of a crevice between them. Because what I'm going to do now is use Mod Podge. As you see, I'm going to use tile grout. You guys see me use this all the time. I'm going to mix the Mod Podge and the tile grout together to form this texture paste. I'm going to add a couple of different browns in here. Color doesn't really matter. I'm just trying to have like almost not a primer, but a base coat to this texture paint. And this is the way I like to do it to make these mixtures. I like, again, getting Mod Podge and tile grout. There are different options too. You can just simply brush on some glue and throw some sand on there to add texture. You could you can get pre-mixed tile grout directly from the hardware store that comes in a larger tub. I mix my own version of this paste because I can mix it little bits at a time, so it doesn't dry out. I can mix just the amount I'm going to use. But once I've mixed this, what I'm going to do now is just apply it to everything, even over the little rocks, even over the tiny rocks in between the 2 crevices. I'm going to put this everywhere. And I should mention, everything I've glued down until this point has been with hot glue. You don't actually have to use a hot glue. Hot glue is not always the best glue to use here. I use it because, like I've said before, I have the patience of a toddler. But really, sometimes the best glue to use is either a glue that's specific for for foam, or even like a wood glue or a PVA glue, which is basically Elmer's glue wall. That's fine too, or even Mod Podge is good for this. But again, I use hot glue because it's quick, it's fast, and I've never really had any issues with it. And you can see here I've pretty much covered the entire diorama with this initial paste that I've made, this tile grout and Mod Podge mixture. And if you're wondering why I use Mod Podge instead of regular Elmer's glue all here, is because Elmer's glue all tends to shrink a little bit more, I find, than Mod Podge. And when that happens, you can, anything that's really thin, like maybe the white foam core board that I use at the bottom, if you cover that in anything that shrinks, it'll tend to warp. Not that Mod Podge is immune to shrinkage, but I find it to shrink less than regular PVA Elmer's glue. And once it's dry, this already looks pretty good. It has this cohesive feel now that it's painted all in one color, but you know we're gonna go further than that. So here I have two different, well, on my right there's just basic play sand. You can get that at a hardware store or outside. And on the left on that cup that I just put down were tiny little pebbles, the same kind of rock pebbles that I put in the crevice between the two main ground coverings. And here I'm just using PVA glue. I used Aleene's tacky glue, which again is just a PVA glue. You can use Elmer's glue. And I mix it 1-to-1 with water. And I'm using that 1-to-1 PVA or Elmer's glue mixture and water. And I'm going to put it in certain areas and then get the two types of rocks, which one is just sand, the other one is tiny rocks, and gently sprinkle it over it. Now, where would you place this? Me, well, you can see in the video where I'm placing it. I'm placing it in the recesses, in the crevice in the middle, anywhere there's, there might be shadow and shade, just to give it that extra texture in there. But in reality, you can place it wherever you want, including covering the entire diorama in this stuff. Once I've done that, and it's kind of glued a little bit, I want to make sure it sticks. So I'm going to come back with a pipette, however you say that, this thing I'm using. And I'm going to drop some of that same mixture, the same thing, the PVA 1-to-1 mix with water. And I'm just going to apply it over the tiny little pebbles, rocks, and sand that I've already placed down. Create that seal. Time for some airbrushing. Here I'm using Vallejo colors. This is one of my favorite brands of paints. It's probably the paint I have the most of. And they make all kinds of paints for models, even for traditional acrylic painting on a canvas. But they're really well known for their model paints. And I'm using their Game Air series. It doesn't really matter, but I happen to be using their Game Air series, which I love. And here I'm using a dark flesh tone, which is a dark brown. And if you're asking why I'm using dark flesh instead of like a burnt umber, it's because I ran out of burnt umber. But this was just as good. And next up, I'm going with a lighter color. I believe this one's just called Earth. And it's like a tan ochre color, and I'm going to hit the corners of the rocks here and the uppermost surfaces, whereas before with the dark flesh tone, or basically just a dark brown, I was going in the recesses to give more depth to the shadow. So after the dark brown and then the earth color, I hit it with a color called Desert Yellow. And again, the Desert Yellow is an even brighter color where I'm hitting just the very topmost peaks and corners. Now, let's get a little crazy. I've got ultramarine blue and scarlet red. And red and blue together make purple. So I'm going to mix these two colors together to make a purple color. And I'm going to thin it down with some Liquitex Airbrush Medium. And I'm going to apply that to the undersides of the rocks as much as I can. And yes, You're right, I am applying purple to the underside of the rocks. This is to give it this cool tone. Not cool as in, hey, it's super cool, but you know what I mean. A cool, as opposed to warm tone, a cool tone. And this will give an interesting hint of purple. Now, as you see me spraying this, I mean, it looks really purple. It's very obvious. But there's going to be a lot more steps here after this. There's going to be washes that are applied with a brush and even with an airbrush afterwards. So this will be really toned down, but it will still show through in the end in subtle tones. This really, to me, this is interesting. It keeps the base, it gives the base a little bit more life rather than just having it being neutral tones. This really makes it pop a little bit in the end. Next up, I'm going to take some sepia FW ink, which I always use. I've seen me use this before. And I'm going to mix that with some water, not an exact ratio, but maybe 2 to 3 drops of ink to a lot of water, 20 drops of water. So 2 to 3 drops of ink versus 20 drops of water. And I'm going to get a brush and I'm going to apply it to, again, the deepest recesses. This is to create a deeper shade. So all the ground covering and the deepest recesses. I'm going to avoid the topmost peaks of the rocks and the very top surface or the center surface of that ground covering. I'm going to focus on the edge of any of the small rocks around that edge to create more depth, more separation between rocks. As you can see, it starts to darken those recesses as the ink begins to dry and as I'm still applying it here. By the way, at any point, if you're following along, if you're making something like this, I'm still going here. There's still more steps. But if at any point you deem it done, then stop. You stop where you feel it looks good to you. And if you're wondering what I'm doing here, I'm just getting more of that sepia ink, and now I haven't diluted it. I just put it straight into my airbrush. And again, I'm going into the most deepest recesses, even less now, to create even more shadow and give more depth to this piece. And you can already see it's really starting to pop. You've got your really dark areas, and you've got your really light areas. It's important to have that contrast. Next, I'm going to use some hobby grade paint. I happen to be using Deco Art and Ceramcoat. The point is, hobby grade paint. I'm using a light tan color. I believe this is called Golden Straw, which is like a light tan yet ochreish color, and a grayish tan. So the first one was like a yellowish tan. The other one is a grayish tan. The grayish tan is called Trail Tan. You don't have to use these exact colors, just something close, or maybe you can just use one color, whatever you prefer. And I'm just dry brushing these two paints on. Remember, dry brushing is getting a little bit of paint on the brush, dry most of it off on a piece of paper, and then just whisking away on the uppermost surfaces so that the paint grabs those little rock textures and makes that more apparent. And yeah, I am using dry pigments. You first saw me use dry pigments in the last episode, which I was weathering the Hot Twist Pennywise suit, but this time I'm going to be using dry pigments in this diorama. And it's a Vallejo product. It's Vallejo dry pigment, and it's called Light Sienna. And I'm just using a brush. This is completely dry. There's no sealer or fixative that I've added to this dry powder. I'm literally just brushing on a powder to the uppermost surfaces. And what the powder does is it gives it this really powdery or dusty look, which is important in a base like this, in a base that's supposed to represent Earth. You don't have to do this. You don't have to go to this level. I find that this gives it, again, that earthy feel. And when I'm done, the only thing I did here after this was apply a clear coat, Krylon flat or matte clear coat, just to protect it. And here comes the finishing touches. This is a simple wooden plaque base that I bought off Amazon. I spray painted it black. Didn't come black, but it's just a simple spray paint in black, gloss black. And I'm going to use PVA glue. In this case, Aleene's PVA glue. You can use wood glue, you can use Elmer's glue all, that works. But I am going to use this glue because I find it to be very good for foam, sticking foam to wood. But just in case, you'll notice I'm doing like a little target here. That's because I'm also going to use hot glue. I put down the PVA glue first because it takes a while to dry, and hot glue dries instantly, or hardens instantly. So the hot glue will keep it in place while the PVA glue slowly dries. And I'll just put it there, perfect fit. And yes, the wooden plaque base was exactly 8 inches. That's why originally I measured the 8 inches of that foam core board, the 8-inch diameter. And you remember that original paste that I made to cover the entire diorama? What I did was I still had a little bit left over, and I mixed it with a dark brown paint. And I'm just applying it to the edge of the foam core board that meets the wood plaque. And I'm doing that just in case there's any gaps that are apparent there. This will be a nice filler, and it kind of matches the dark brown color that's already on the diorama. And this is indeed the last step. I can tell this is going to make for a nice display for a 6 scale figure, or heck, even a 12 scale figure. As long as he fits on here, or she fits on here, right? I think it'll look cool. And if you look closely, you can tell that the dark washes really toned down that purple spray that we did before, but you can still see hints of purple under certain lights, which is exactly what I was going for. Success. And I want to make sure I use this last bit of the paste mixture, which again is tile grout, Mod Podge, and dark brown paint, in case you forgot what that was. But it's the same mixture I had before, I just added a darker paint. And I want to make sure I cover the edge where the foam core board meets that wooden plaque to make it seem like it's seamless. And here we have it, the final product. This is going to be nice. When you're looking at it just like this, I mean, I think it looks cool. I say that humbly so. But I can tell this is going to make for a nice base, even though it just looks like rocks. But see, as soon as you put a figure on it, this almost looks statuesque. Yeah, this is the Hot Toys Mandalorian figure, Din Djarin, the first one they released. And I think this base and this pose looks cool to me. I'd like to hear what you guys think. Let me know in the comments. But this base almost makes it look like a statue, and the best part of it is you can put any figure on here. Here's Iron Man, Mark 85. Probably not the figure I'd choose to display here, but you can. I don't see why not. Heck, let's throw a Predator on there. Why not? Hopefully you guys like that process, and what you took away from it are the techniques. You can choose to duplicate this exact same diorama, and you can do it. Or you can choose to just use the techniques to make a diorama in your own shape and size. That's what it's for. That's why I'm showing you these techniques. So I encourage you, get inspired, go try it out yourself. And what's really cool, I think, is that this episode was part 1 of a 2-part series. This part is called Earth because we just did this jagged earth rock formation. But part 2 is going to be a mirror of this one. You're going to have jagged earth rocks, but in the snow, in ice. So you're going to have some icicles and snow textures and whites and some shimmering colors there. I can't wait. It's going to be cool. I don't usually get to do something like that. So more techniques in the next one. That'll be a fun one. Before I let you go, please remember, go ahead and like this video. Subscribe if you want to see more videos like this. And if you've got some good ideas, you've got some positive feedback, some positive critiques you want to give, tell me how you did your version of this diorama, please go ahead down to the comments. Let me know. Also, let me know what you're interested in seeing. If you have an idea for a video, please let me know. That's the spot to do it. down in the comments. So until next time, guys, stay crafty.